Thank you all for attending this virtual event organized by Word Up Community Bookshop in collaboration with Community League of the Heights, known as Cloth. This is one of a series of events that, of book club, book talks that Cloth has asked Word Up and Sisters Uptown Bookstore to curate. So we've been doing Saturdays all throughout the summer, and we'll be extending into September as well with these events. But first, let me introduce to you what Word Up is, in case any of you have not been there before. We're a bookshop and art space run by local residents, many of whom are volunteers. When we're not experiencing a pandemic, we're more regularly found at 2113 Amsterdam Avenue at the corner of 165th Street in Washington Heights. We are currently there for pickups Tuesday to Friday, 1 to 5 p.m. So if you order books online at wordupbooks.com or are part of any of our programs that offer free books, you can pick it up during those times. And then otherwise, in person, we've normally hosted lots of events all day long for all ages, and now have been mostly doing so online. But we hope you'll visit us when we're ready to open again more fully. We've also partnered with the census to remind our community of how important getting counted is. Billions of dollars are at stake for New York, money that goes to schools, infrastructure, housing, healthcare. We encourage everyone here to take their census at my2020census.gov and to check in with loved ones to make sure they've filled out the census in their preferred languages. Because we aren't sure exactly when we'll be open fully again, we started a GoFundMe campaign to maintain our space and meet our obligations while closed. Thank you so much for coming. This is a talk that I am personally looking forward to because it involves, two people who I've seen speak at different events and different points, and who are really familiar with the history of the neighborhood and the present of our neighborhood, and where Word Up is situated specifically in the southern part of Washington Heights, northern part of Harlem, Sugar Hill, and I am also excited that the featured artist for today, all of the Cloth events have had a featured artist and a featured local business. Our featured artist today happens to be another Word Up collective member, one of the co-founding volunteers back when we opened in 2011 is Emmanuel Abreu, and he'll be presenting later as well. And the talk and all of the later portion will all be facilitated by another longtime collective member, Memphis, Washington, who I think is here and can maybe pop in and would be reading the bios and then doing the transitions after. Thank you all for coming, and I'll see you later.
Okay, so I would just like to introduce our author and our interlocutor for today. MaryLouise Patterson is a pediatrician in clinical practice, and who co-wrote this with Evelyn Louise Crawford, who's a retired arts administrator and consultant, but will not be joining us today. They are the daughters of Langston Hughes' cherished friends. So Hughes was a frequent guest in the homes of the two families and was like an uncle to Evelyn Louise and MaryLouise. And so she'll be reading some of the letters today. And our interlocutor for today's event is Karen D. Taylor, who is the founder of While We Are Still Here, a 501c3 organization that includes long-term residents of 409 and 555 Edgecombe Avenue. The average number of years of residence is 30. So in those two residences. So non-resident members are interested in helping to preserve the grand history of these important sites. While We Are Still Here was formed as a response to the threat that each building's history would be lost and gone forever, partially due to the passing of time and partially due to gentrification, which is rapidly altering the environment. So I'm greatly looking forward to this. Thank you to you both for making this event happen, and I'm looking forward to it. All right.
Hello, everyone. I'm MaryLouise Patterson. I thank you for coming to this book reading event. And thank you to Word Up Community Bookshop, Community League of the Heights, better known as Cloth, and all those who made this event possible, and all the preceding and coming events possible, for bringing my book, Letters from Langston, from the Harlem Renaissance to the Red Scare and beyond, to all of you today. Robin D.G. Kelley, the endowed chair and professor of American history at UCLA, and a longtime people's activist, wrote in the opening of his foreword to our book the following: Langston Hughes has become a household name, an icon of the Harlem Renaissance, the subject of numerous biographies, and one of the bona fide deans of African-American letters. Hughes may be the best known American poet after Robert Frost or Walt Whitman. But to characterize Letters from Langston as simply another epistolary window into the life and times of the Black Bard would be both a mistake and a grave injustice to the entire enterprise. Letters from Langston is a book of correspondence between 5 extraordinary people who sustained an extraordinary friendship during extraordinary times. Lovingly and painstakingly reconstructed by Evelyn Louise Crawford, who could not be with us today, and me, MaryLouise Patterson, who were, in more ways than one, the offspring of these relationships. Evelyn Louise's parents were Matt and Evelyn, also known as Nebby Crawford. Mine were Louise and William, also known as Pat Patterson. My mother knew Langston from 1928. She led him to Matt and Nebby, her best friend. Pat had met him separately as they both had come to Harlem in the early 1920s. As Professor Kelley wrote, theirs was a tight, safe, and trusted friendship, in a word, extraordinary. They wanted nothing from Langston except for him to be the best he could possibly be. With them, Langston was able to take off his mask, let down his hair, to coin a phrase, completely relax, and bat around all manner of ideas. His trust in them was unwavering, and they never betrayed his confidence or that trust. Professor Kelley ends his foreword writing, Letters from Langston redeems not just Hughes's radical politics, but our own. As we grapple with the consequences of neoliberal policies that promote the wealthy at the expense of the poor, privatize hard-won public institutions, and allow police to kill unarmed Black and brown people with impunity, the letters and political lives of Matt, Nebby, Pat, Louise, and Langston are illuminating, to say the least. The 5 corresponded for almost 40 years. I'm going to read 3 letters to you from the book. You may have heard, so the first one is, you may have heard or read about Langston and Zora Neale Hurston's falling out over a project that Louise was their secretary for. The year was 1931, and the project was a play entitled Mulebone. It wasn't officially produced until 1991. This letter is from
MaryLouise, you've muted yourself.
So this is a letter to Louise from Langston in February of 1931. Langston's in Cleveland. He's ill at his mother's house, and he's writing Louise. Dear Lou, as you probably know by now, Zora was here, and how. There were 2 conferences, both with the Jelliffs, one on Monday, another on Tuesday. The Monday one was fairly agreeable. Zora and I went off alone in the front office, settled our private affairs, or so I thought, came out, and she admitted I'd had a part in the play, that she would collaborate, and that she and I would both sign the contract for the production here. However, overnight, the change took place. In the early dawning, Zora called up Mrs. Jelliff and proceeded to attempt to bawl her out by phone for daring to put my name beside hers on the play, for taking your word for anything as you were this and that and the other, etc. Mrs. Jelliff said you were a friend of theirs and that she wouldn't listen to any more over the phone, and that we could all meet again at 5. I was in bed with tonsillitis, so everyone came to my house. Well, anyhow, this young man was with her, the Jelliffs, my mother and me, and such a scene you cannot possibly imagine. The young man, of course, said nothing, but Zora pushed her hat back on her head, bucked her eyes, ground her teeth, and proceeded to rear. She called Mrs. Jelliff a dishonorable person, said she, Zora, had not come all the way to Cleveland to be made a fool of, implied that everyone was trying to pull sly tricks on her and she knew it, said who was you that anybody should take your word. Here again, Mrs. Jelliff said you were her friend. I said that you had nothing to do with the point under discussion anyway. Zora then shook the manuscript in my face, dared and defied me to put a finger on the line that was mine, and that what had been mine in there, she had changed in her new version. I was just trying to steal her work from her. And so on until Mr. Jelliff asked his wife to no longer remain to be further insulted, whereupon they all left, Zora without even saying goodbye to mother or I. She contends that I wanted you to have a large interest in the profits in the play. Therefore, she withdrew. Can you imagine it? I'm glad you have another job and that I have my new book well in mind. They can all go to the nether regions as far as I'm concerned. Best of luck to you and love to mother. I'm going to write her. Take care of that cold you said you had and find yourself a mule bone because the free-for-all is on. Sincerely, Langston. In 1933, Louise's mother died, and Louise writes Langston. Langston knew Louise's mother very well. So Louise is writing Langston in February of 1933. Dear Lang, mother slipped away quietly on last Thursday morning at 7 o'clock. Services were Friday at 3, and Howard Thurman conducted a most beautiful ceremony, which was a tribute worthy of Mother Thompson. That's what they called Louise's mother. I have a great sense of peace now and quiet happiness. My mother is no longer suffering. She suffered such intense agony, and particularly during the last 10 days, it was so terrible for her, so that anyone who loved her could only be glad when her suffering had ended. Everyone was most kind. Your mother came frequently and stayed many of those last nights with us. We had a nurse for Mama when she became so low, but your mother and others came each day and night to do what they could. So the experience that I dreaded most of all in my life became relatively easy. On the one hand, because since there was no other relief for Mama, I wanted her to go. And on the other hand, those about us helped so much. I have no plans for making any change at present. Mary, who was Louise's cousin, is here with me. Then Doris and Emily have been with us and will continue for a while anyway. Tomorrow morning, I shall return to work. In other words, I shall go ahead living as I knew Mother would wish it, missing her very much, but indulging in no morbidity. The Scottsboro boys and Angelo Herndon must be saved, and one must sublimate his personal problems to the great struggle. I received your cable and finally your letter from Moscow. And then she goes on. In Harlem, we have succeeded in stirring a number of intellectuals and petty bourgeois elements on Scottsboro and Herndon. We have a Sunday night forum at Augusta's, that was Augusta Savage, the great sculptor, and have begun a Marxian study circle. Then there are many other things, and now I shall throw my every minute into the thing. We held 2 large mass meetings on Scottsboro at Abyssinian and St. Philip's churches and had about 1,000 Harlem Negroes at each meeting. I hear that Matt is doing very good work up north. Also that he's trying to begin a left-wing magazine for Negro intellectuals. Lang, I wish you would try to bring something back with you from Moscow concerning the film. Karen and I may talk about that later. Go to them about it. I would love to write more, but I have no time now. Love to you, your pal, Lou. And then a letter typical of Langston that he wrote to Matt in 1941. Dear Matt, SOS, broke and ruined. Having just come back from Los Angeles working on another show that didn't come off as yet. I must be crazy. But have you got a 20 or a 10 or a 5 you can lend me until royalties or something another comes along? At the moment, I'm just getting over the flu, which have Eula and the houseman down in bed most of the week too. I have a dog for Nebby, half Dachshund and half Cocker, very cute and black, if you all think you'd like it. We'll bring it up next time I come. Just old enough to be housebroken too, I think, I hope. I trust I shall see you shortly. Due back in LA in February for a lecture. Be up north first. This was talking about California. They were in California. Happy New Year to you all. Love, Lang. And then when I was born in 1943, he wrote me this letter. Dear MaryLouise, this is for your first collection of original manuscripts. By the time you are old enough to read, I hope this war will be over. And by the time you're a big girl, I hope the red star will be shining everywhere and that you will be here a long time to enjoy all of its blessings. So be a nice baby and take your cod liver oil and grow up strong. With love from Langston. And here's what he sent me. Mama, I found this soldier's cap lying in the snow. It has a red star on it. Whose is it? Do you know? Do I have time for 2 more, Karen? You're muted.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so the last 2 is a conversation between my father, Pat, and Langston. My father was one of Langston's ardent followers and supporters. But he was also very candid. And this is typical of the kind of back and forth that Langston and Pat had. And neither one was upset with the other for their candor. They sought that from one another. They wanted the honesty. They wanted the critical interpretation of what they were doing. So Langston had written a play called Simply Heavenly, and it was being produced on Broadway at the time. This was 1957 in June. Dear Langston, Louise, Mary Lou, and I saw Simply Heavenly Tuesday night. Thanks for the tickets. And may I here and now, very belatedly, thank you for sending us I Wonder As I Wander and several other books. I Wonder As I Wander was excellent. Personally, I regard it as the best of the many fine things you've done, Lang. It seemed to me that in it, you were more appreciative of the impact of social forces upon people than ever before, and that the naturalistic approach that I feel often characterizes your treatment of the reaction of an individual to his or her environment was absent. The result was I saw several individuals in larger dimensions. I saw them in the midst of social conflicts in which they were caught up or which at least were making a marked impact upon their lives. It is difficult to define my reaction to Simply Heavenly. I cannot say that I liked it. I'm not a theatrical critic, but if in a formal sense, it did not appeal to me. Simply Heavenly does not say what so greatly needs to be said at this moment, Lang, at least not to me. I'm not a prude. Some episodes of the animal impulses of a person may be amusing, some valuable educationally, but some may be posed so as to reflect discredit upon a people. Then they do not prove that people's affinity to humanity, but rather the opposite. That is the way in which the portrayal of animal appetites, which almost dominates Simply Heavenly, struck me. It dehumanized the characters. Clearly, they did not appear to embody in themselves the quality of real people. The characters ate, danced, prepared for the gratification of sexual desires, as though these things constituted the full range and thought of their action. No idea emerges to reveal that the terrible trials of a woman with 17 kids will force her to find some outlet for free expression. That there are simply heavenly people, no one can deny. How tremendously complex is the life of a simple. You're simple. Oversimplified it with all the maudlin pathos he sought to inject into it. To me, Lang, the play was political, but the politics suited my enemies, Simple's enemies, aims and purposes in describing the Negro. The men who derive billions from our misery seek to find a justification for subjecting us to an environment that warps and destroys us to their great profit. Simply Heavenly certainly provides them some justification. This is not the time to aid Simple's enemies when his friends in Montgomery, Ghana, and elsewhere are fighting too desperately to effect fundamental changes. Someone may argue, is there no time, no place for laughter? I heard much laughter there, and in the main from Negroes, to whom the subtleties that escaped a white person were clear. The answer is, there is a place for laughter. But the question is, how do you invoke healthy laughter at such an hour as this? I don't think that you do it through an exposure of the frailties of a simple and his friends. The social life of the Negro people now runs the gamut of social life in the United States. The people on your stage revealed no real desire for change. They were in the right milieu. But today the emphasis is upon change, fundamental change. The Negro people may make the life simple endured, but I would today show them reacting differently to what they had been forced to make. Now maybe that would not sell, I don't know. I think perhaps it would. When Simple tried to show the pressures on him, he does it too narrowly. And Joyce lacks such human qualities as would have enabled her to help him or he her. So Simple is the product of inner forces, mysterious forces, peculiar to Negroes. He is the eternally recurring primitive Negro, so childishly simple and so simply childish. He is the poor Black burden his civilized white brother must carry through life. The time and place call, I believe, for something else, Lang. The Negro today can play a more dominant role in American life. Thanks again, but one must do more than dip one's fingers into progressive life. Simple won't help Montgomery. Well, not everything can be geared to help Montgomery, some say. Perhaps not. But Langston Hughes can help. He has done much to help all of us. Carry on, and the best of things to you. Sincerely, Pat. And this was Langston's response to Pat. June 8th, 1957. Dear Pat, I'm certainly sorry I wasn't at the theater the night you all came, as I would have loved to say hello to you. Your long letter is greatly appreciated and your views valid in a number of ways, I'm sure. But it's the old story and the old problem I've been wrestling with for years, how to get everything to suit everybody into one piece. And when it comes to plays, it is a miracle to end up with anything at all one wishes left in the play, after 20 or 30 other people have had a hand in the creation, from producer and director to actors. The problems with this particular show were legion, so to have left flying saucers in Mississippi is at least something. Several folks have expressed your viewpoint with variations, re-race, while others, as you've no doubt read and heard, take the opposite viewpoint, like Roosevelt Ward. Re-sex therein, some feel as you do. Others term it a family show and come to see it again, bringing the kids. So, quien sabe? If, as you think, it is a lulling show, maybe there is some virtue in lulling with one hand while lopping with the other. Semantics. Hey now, anyway, there's plenty left out of this version of Simple that I wish were in. But in books, one has 300 pages to work with, and in a play, only 80. In publishing, only one editor to contend with, and mine almost never suggests changes. But in the theater, everybody pulls and hauls at a script, so all I can say is I did the best I could under the circumstances. Next time might be luckier, maybe come out better. Let's hope so. But that it gets your serious consideration and you write me so helpful a letter is at least something to be grateful for. Best ever, and hope to see you and the family soon as work pressures let up. That show threw me back weeks on other deadlines, besides being the most frustrating, Theater is also almost the most time-taking of the arts. Wonder will I ever catch up? Sincerely, Langston.
So Mary Lou, how did this wonderful project come about?
Well, my mother was the last one of the quintet to leave us. And when she did in 1999, at the age of 98, almost 99, Nebby Lou, or Evelyn Louise, and I had these letters that we had seen since childhood. And we knew we really had to do something with them, that we couldn't just let them be part of the private family legacy, you know, inheritance, that they belonged to the world. And we needed to bring them forth, to birth them, so to speak. And so we began working on an outline. And the first thing that we did was we went up to the Beinecke Library at Yale to see if Langston had kept any of the letters that our parents had written him. And when we got there, we found not only had he kept their letters, but he had kept letters that we had written to him as children that we forgot about completely. So we were so moved. We knew we had this project and we had to do it.
So how long did it take to find a publisher?
Well, it took us 15 years to do the book, Karen. We were back and forth. I was working full-time and I was living in California and then New York. And Evelyn Louise was initially in California and then she moved to Atlanta. And at the time we started, we didn't have a publisher, we didn't have an editor, we didn't have a literary agent. We only had our own salaries and our own energy. And neither one of us had ever written a book. So, you know, here we were. And although we were like sisters from before we were born, right? We'd never worked on a project together. So we had to learn how to do that too. We were very fortunate in that Robin Kelly, Professor Robin Kelly, came on board. We pitched it to him very early and he came on board, and it was with his help that we were able to get to UC California Press, and they published the book in 2016. February 2015, actually 16, actually on the day of Langston's birth, February 1st, the book came out. So we were lucky.
That's a wonderful story. 15 years, just
Yes.
back and forth and putting the letters together and reconstructing the timeline. That's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Now, you make mention of Angelo Herndon, the Red Star, and Russia. Can you put Langston Hughes into his political context? Because most people know him as this extraordinary literary person. He was a poet, he was a playwright, he wrote a memoir. So can you talk about him as a political person?
I think Langston was very definitely a political person his entire life. And if you read his opus from the beginning to end, you'll see that the thread that runs through is not only a love for his people, back then we were called Negro people, but also a desire, a burning desire to see Negro people's liberation, their freedom, and that we received justice, and that we became full citizens of the United States with all the rights entitled in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, et cetera, and rights that had been won through struggle, you know, an 8-hour working day and Social Security, et cetera. So Langston starts out as a political person through his encountering racism as a child. And then he, through his working experience as a waiter, as a seaman, seeing and experiencing the exploitation of workers, and then comes to Harlem in the 1920s when there was tremendous fervor. The Russian Revolution had happened in 1917. There was tremendous fervor and activity in Harlem then. That was the Renaissance period. And there were all manner of people on the left, from light pink to, crimson red. Speakers on the favorite corner was 135th Street and 7th Avenue. And there'd be a speaker on each corner expounding their ideas, their ideology, their party's party line. And
speaking of party line, can you make a connection of Langston to the Soviet Union and the Communist Party, or just communism in general? Because so much of that aspect of his being has been kind of, erased and submerged.
So yeah, it's a long answer, and it's a part of the question that you asked me. Mine is a long answer, and it's part of the question that you asked me before. Langston, in 1932, my mother was asked to organize a group of what turned out to be 22 African Americans to go to the Soviet Union, to Moscow, to make a film called Black and White. The film was never made, but Langston was one of those who went. And when he got there, he was asked to help them work on the script. They found the script an impossible script, and Langston starts working on the script. And in brief, it was a story of Black workers in the South who are going on strike against, a monster of a factory owner and a capitalist factory owner, and organized workers, white workers from the North come down to help them, and Black and white unite and fight. And they were supposed to win the struggle, and the unionization of the factory in the South. But it was a fairy tale script, as I said. And so Langston stays on in the Soviet Union to work on the script. And they are toured. They go down to the southern part of the Soviet Union where there are people of color living, and they see, Louise, all of them that went on this trip, how socialism had changed the lives of these colored people so much for the better. Some of the people had no written alphabet. So they have a written alphabet. They had no universities, and now they had universities. Women who were basically in bondage are now going to school, going to university. And they were really moved by that. It reminded them of the South, the southern part of the Soviet Union. And they saw the possibilities for people when people were in charge of their own lives, when they were running the government, when they were making the policies that governed their lives, how their lives could be so much better. And so they're radicalized there in the Soviet Union. Now, Louise had begun to be radicalized before going to the Soviet Union, but Langston is really radicalized there. And he later, during World War II, is writing poems such as "To Leningrad," "Ode to Stalin," "Put one more S in the USA," and those kinds of very radical, revolutionary kinds of poetry. Langston always, when asked to sign a petition, to speak at a rally, Langston was always there. He was very active in the fight for the lives of the Scottsboro boys. He wrote a poem about Scottsboro. and Angelo Herndon, who was an organizer in the South, a union organizer in the South, who was a member of the Communist Party, and wrongfully charged with a murder, and was in jail and being threatened, with the death penalty. So were the Scottsboro Boys, who were 9 young men who had been wrongfully accused of raping 2 young white women, and they were in prison in Scottsboro, Alabama, and had been found guilty and were scheduled to be put to death, the youngest of which was only 14 years old. And as I said, they were wrongfully accused. So Langston then, in the 1950s, during the period of McCarthy, finds himself having to sort of take a tactical retreat. He's called to testify before the McCarthy House On-American Activities Committee, and he is betrayed by McCarthy. McCarthy in private tells him that he won't ask him to name any names if Langston will renounce some of his earlier poetry. The next day in the public hearing, McCarthy, in fact, asks him to name names. And it's a really humiliating, a horrible affair for Langston. But Langston never gave up his belief in the rights of workers to own the fruits of their own labor, decent housing for everyone, education for everyone, universal health care, issues that we are still demanding and fighting for today. Langston never gave those beliefs and those goals up. So yeah, he was sanitized later and became the Langston of Simple and and Simple stories. But even when you look at Simple's stories during the 1950s, during this horrible McCarthy, anti-communist period, the Red Scare period, he has Simple talking about the struggles in the South and getting rid of the H-bomb and other such commentaries that you can see that Langston, Simple was kind of Langston's alter ego, and that Langston is still in there, is still in the fight.
Well, in eras prior to the 1950s, or in eras prior to the current era, I think there was more of an international connection of Black Americans to struggles throughout the world, the so-called third world. And one of the things I find most fascinating about Langston is his presence during the Spanish Civil War. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Langston, during the Spanish Civil War, there was actually tremendous support for the newly elected loyalist government in Spain, that then the fascists, under the leadership of General Franco, yes, I was trying to think of his first name, Generalissimo Franco, so, the most of the most generals, and aided and abetted by the United States and Britain and Germany, they actually attempted a coup on the newly elected government. And so there was a humanitarian outcry, people from all over the world, and from the United States, there was a group of people who went to defend the new Spanish government, and they named themselves the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. And Langston went as a reporter for the Afro-American and a couple of other African-American newspapers to cover this, because there were a significant number of African-Americans who were part of this Abraham Lincoln Brigade. So Langston goes to Spain, and he's bombed in Spain. He, you know, like many journalists, he's on the front. And he's reporting on the fight to preserve democracy in Spain. And ultimately, the fight, as you know, was lost. Franco wins and that ushers in the period of fascism and World War II. And it's commonly believed, really, now that had Franco been defeated, that World War II might not have happened. But yeah, internationalism was definitely a part of not only Langston, but my parents and Evelyn Louise's parents, the Crawfords' lives, their concern about South Africa and, for instance, the Council on African Affairs, which was organized by Du Bois and Paul Robeson, Alpheus Hunton. My mother was a secretary for. Langston was active with them. So there was always this international connection and the understanding that actually those who were oppressing African Americans here were oppressing people abroad, either in Africa, Asia, or Latin America. And if it wasn't the US directly, it was the US allies that were doing it. So that we needed international solidarity because the enemy was one and the same.
For our last question, what is one of the lasting lessons that you learned from Langston?
Oh, I think from Langston and my parents, and from doing this project, we learned, both of us realized how valiant, how courageous they were, that they could have chosen another life. Langston could have been, you know, a poet with a lot of money, or more money than he had. I guess poetry in the United States never really brought any poet a lot of money. But had Langston chosen a different path, a different politics, he would have been embraced by the powers that be and would have lived a comfortable life. And so would my parents. I mean, these four people were highly accomplished. They were university graduates. They, you know, they could have easily made peace with slow, gradual change, you know, social change only, not economic change. But they chose to do different. And so their choice to fight the battle from the left perspective, and to hold to that through their entire lives, was a lesson that we learned. You don't give up your principles, you don't give up your beliefs, if they are in fact those that will help the majority of the people.
Thank you very much for that. So I'll just turn it over to Memphis and/or Veronica.
By way of opening up for Q&A. So within, at the bottom of the panel, at the bottom of the screen for the participants, there is a section that says Q&A, a box. So there are already some questions that have been, that participant Mulan has put into the chat. I guess the first question that I'll read out for you all is, James Baldwin is certainly known as an acclaimed writer and political activist. Now the 21st century, there's a huge resurgence in Baldwin's study. Do you see Langston Hughes as occupying similar space? Why or why not?
So the answer is yes. And clearly Langston predates Baldwin a little bit. But they met, they knew each other. Baldwin, I don't think was as close to the Communist Party and to the left as Langston was throughout his life, in terms of his friendships with my parents, who were members of the Communist Party, and Evelyn Louise's father, who was a member of the Communist Party at one point. But Baldwin clearly understood the contradictions and understood white supremacy and anti-Black racism, and was a was a champion for the rights of Black people and oppressed people, and so was Langston. Langston perhaps linked that oppression more internationally than Baldwin may have done, but Baldwin was clearly aware of it because he'd lived in Paris for a number of years and knew a number of the Africans who lived in Paris or who came to Paris, who were fighting for their national liberation and were waging anti-colonial wars or anti-colonial struggles in their home countries. So he was clearly aware of that. I don't think he talked about it as much as perhaps Langston did. But yeah, they were on the same side, the same team.
Another question, what might be some of your parents, sorry, thank you for that. What might some of your parents' response be to Yuval Taylor's book, Zora and Langston? I don't know if this is something, this is another question, I'm curious, from the chat.
That's a harder question to answer, and I think I need a lot more time. And I read the book. Because the fallout over Mulebone, as I read that letter that Langston wrote to Louise, the first letter that I read, ended the friendship between Langston and Zora, and they never really patched up. And Zora was a complicated person. And no one who writes about Zora denies that. She was a very complicated person and also a difficult person. But she clearly was a woman before her time, and should have been more renowned during her life than she was. You know, she moves steadily to the right, becomes a right winger, and dies in basically anonymity when she dies in an unmarked grave. She's buried. So she was that far removed at the end of her life from the Black community, from the struggles of Black people. Yet her contribution, to the canon is undisputable. And, but she was complicated. My mother, who knew her well and was one of the last remaining people to have known her that well, refused to talk about Zora. And I think it was because Louise didn't want to, even though they never patched up either completely. When Langston writes, get yourself a Mulebone because the fight is on, Louise then does come back to New York, or Zora comes back to New York, and they see each other. And Zora, Louise said Zora came up to her and gave her a big hug. Louise was expecting a kick in the shins, and instead she gets a hug from Zora. But they never really were the kind of best friends that they had been when she was their secretary. I think the book wrongfully portrays Louise. I think the book portrays Louise as someone who underhandedly was manipulating Langston, that Langston, in other words, implies or infers that Langston is kind of weak and easily manipulated. On the other hand, I think his description of Zora you know, he tries to capture her complexity and her, you know, who she was as a person. She definitely was a complex person. And I'm not sure that Zora was really a happy person or found that kind of peace within herself. Maybe happy is not the word, but content with who she was. Anyway, that's my answer. I'm certainly not suggesting that people not read the book.
The author of these questions, the asker, has responded in some ways, mostly thanking you for your beautifully generous response regarding Taylor's book, and for your insight on Langston Hughes, the Communist Party associations being a way that he may be silenced in our current political conversations. Is there any other audience, are there any other audience questions? I think Karen may have dropped out kind of. I think maybe something happened with her connection, but
Veronica's back.
Hi, sorry. Karen had just messaged that she felt like something had come up, so she had to run out. But I had just been about to reply to her, but then she dropped out. So that's all. But
please tell her that I thank her for being the interlocutor and for asking those questions. And I look forward to working with her again. And congratulations to the bookstore, and I hope that people do make contributions so that we can keep this really valuable bookstore in our neighborhood, and that it has many years of life ahead of it. So thank you for asking me to do this. I enjoyed it very much. And for those of you who got a free book, congratulations. You know, if someone is wanting to have me sign the book, they can certainly contact the bookstore. And once we're back and able to touch one another, I would happily come to the bookstore and sign any books. And I hope that the bookstore is able to order books for people who might want one. I think it's really, you know, I know I wrote the book, but I think it's a great book.
Yeah, we have more in stock at the store too. So if anybody, there was a link I dropped at near the beginning of the event. We'll drop it again, but it's, if you search the book on our site, you might get one link that says that it seems like it's not available, but we physically have a bunch of books at the store. So there's another link that should work that will get you through the order, and we have them available. So we can deliver, you can pick up. We have pickup hours now, Tuesday to Friday, 1 to 5 if you're in the neighborhood. And also I had a question for you. Is that okay?
Sure.
Because I know that you've done work with at Word Up too. We were working with the interns, right, the youth interns at UPA, and I know that the very first year of their program, they'd spoken to you, and I wanted to know like what further work you've done with them and what you see ahead for that generation in the neighborhood.
So Uptown Progressive Action, UPA, is a group that morphed out of the first Bernie campaign, not this last one, but the one before. And we are in Washington Heights and in, excuse me, and in Inwood. And very recently we had one of our first interns organize a youth chapter of UPA here in the Heights. And, we're trying to organize. What we're trying to do now is obviously work on the census and make sure that everybody is counted, and then to get out the vote. I mean, people have to get out the vote. We have to get rid of Trump, no matter what people think about Biden, how much they are disappointed or don't like him or don't like his politics or whatever it is. We've got to dump Trump. And that's the task ahead. And so they are working on that as well. We're pushing a progressive agenda in Washington Heights. You know, universal health care. We're working with the New York State Health Act people to get New York State to pass universal health care in the state of New York. If we can't get it nationally, at least we can have it statewide. People are working on housing. There's a demonstration tomorrow around housing and preventing evictions. So UPA, we have a website, people can go to it. Please do. People are working in education, people working on jobs, people working in the environment. So there are all kinds of subcommittees that, you know, some are on hold right now because of COVID, but that's who UPA is. And yeah, we're very much alive and well and trying to work in the community for progressive change.
We have a couple of comments in the chat from people. Thank you for speaking to Uptown Progressive Action. I was really excited to meet some of the youth in that group a couple of years ago, and excited to hear more about what's happening and to collaborate with the shop. I just want to communicate in case you haven't seen it. Elizabeth Starchevich says, "Thank you, MaryLouise, for affirming the connection and significance of the Communist Party to Langston." And now there's a question of what's the UPA's website URL or a way of contacting them?
I think it's just upa.org, but you know what? I will, I don't want to misdirect people, so I need to get that to you. And I
just dropped it in the chat. Never mind.
Yeah. No, before the end of your program, I'll get it to you. I'll put it in the chat so that you can, when you finish and move on to the next, to the artist, I'll get it for you.
Well, I want to say thank you so much for your presentation, for your tireless work. I mean, 15 years in production, and now you're continuing to work to promote this information and share with us. Thank you. Thank you for this program. I believe now I'm meant to introduce our artist, and look forward to being able to collaborate with you and with UPA in the future.
Emmanuel, you want to come on? If you're the artist being featured, let us feature you. Thank you, MaryLouise.
You're welcome. Thank you once again. And welcome, Emmanuel.
What's up?
You know, it's all good. We're going, you know, we're going for a win, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
The DJ, sorry, no, Emmanuel. Emmanuel. Sorry, for context, I'm referring to him by a nickname, but his official name and his professional name is Emmanuel Abreu. He is a New York City-based photographer who's been collaborating with his Uptown community of Washington Heights and Inwood since the start of his career. His images tend to capture the raw joy in almost any situation, and this is why his work led him to become a professional wedding photographer. His travel photography focuses on landscape, street, and sometimes portraiture, just like in his neighborhood. Some of his work has been featured on media outlets like the local Manhattan Times, New York Times, and local blogs, as well as sites like Huffington Post and Gothamist. He hopes to continue capturing the love and beauty of his community for years to come. Without further ado, Emmanuel Abreu.
Hi, everyone. I'll keep this as short as I can. So I am meant to show you some piece of artwork that you will, one of you will win today. And to give you the context, I'm going to show you a video. So trigger warning, it is fireworks. It's a fireworks video. So if you stayed up and were stressed out and became very anxious because of the fireworks, I feel you. It's a short 4-minute video, and there will be, you know, images of fireworks going off. But it is fun and it is cool. And I'm just gonna share my screen now. Let me just, okay. And if there's any issues, please put it in the chat box so I can adjust. Okay.
July 4th, 2020. This is the most consequential 4th of July since the first one, with NYC newly emerging from almost 4 months of quarantine, with a pandemic still raging, with depression-era levels of unemployment and the summer effectively canceled, with propulsive pyrotechnics ringing out almost non-stop for weeks on end, with protests pushing the people's agenda forward, with the NYPD decidedly in their feelings and deciding that doing their job is an unfair burden. The decision has been made from on high. Make the citizenry miss us. It is either us or the thugs. But who are the thugs? The natives are getting restless. Magic, moxie, mayhem. It is intoxicating and toxic simultaneously. This must be what the end of the world feels like.
Frankie, motherfucking pay.
doors, please.
Okay, can y'all see the photo that I'm showing right now? Or trying to show?
Yes.
Okay, so I couldn't pick one image. So whoever wins the print can choose from this one, which is a photo taken right behind my building with my drone. This one was taken in Lower Washington Heights, also with my drone. And this was taken on Vermilion and Dykeman with my regular camera. And I just like the fact that the cops did nothing about the fireworks. I don't like that. I mean, I like that I captured that. And I just want to add real quick that the night of the fireworks, there was a fire at an apartment. And if you'd like to help the victim of that fire, you can search Dykeman Fire on GoFundMe, and you'll find them easily. And if you want to donate to them, I just think it's important that we work together after things like that happen. If you have any questions for me, just throw it in the chat. I'm good.
Thank you for sharing, Emmanuel. The sheer amount of fireworks is certainly anxiety-inducing. I only spent a couple of nights in New York during that time because of it. And every time I was on the phone with any of my friends, there were fireworks in the background. So, thank you for capturing that. And you really chose great people to collaborate with on sound and music. So, yeah. So now that Emmanuel has showcased his work, I believe there is a raffle that is taking place amongst the people who are with us.
Thanks everyone for joining the talk. There's another one that's going to be next Saturday. It's at 3 p.m. That's going to be hosted by Word Up. There's one for Sisters is hosting at 1 p.m. and another one at 3 p.m. That Word Up is hosting. And the one that Word Up is hosting at 3 p.m. Features Serena Prabhasi from Booney Coffee, and the proprietor of Booney Coffee, and her book, The Coffee House Resistance, in conversation with Word Up's own Cynthia Pong. Don't Stay in Your Lane is the new book that Cynthia is releasing, I think the very next week. And it's a career change guide for women of color. So the two of them will be in conversation, and Serena is also, you know, she's someone who totally changed her career to open the coffee shop that's in her neighborhood. So it's an exciting combination. 3 p.m. next Saturday. Do we have a name?
We do. We have an initial, and it's U for Uniqua Simmons.
Uniqua! Hooray! Congratulations.
Hey, Anthony, I hope you're not allergic to flowers.
We'll be in touch. We'll have your email from the Zoom stuffs. And thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you, and take care. And we'll see you next Saturday, hopefully. Yes.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Take care.